What's up, everyone? I go by the gamertag Swordmania, and I served as a media creator for the Indiana University Smash Brothers Club for the 2014 through 2015 school year. Essentially, my role was to help produce creative materials like YouTube thumbnails, tournament trailers, Facebook banners, and the like. However, at the time of this video, I've graduated. So, in order to help train new people to take my place, I've decided to produce this tutorial miniseries called Smashing and Streaming. Despite the name, the majority of the videos in this playlist will not really deal with getting better at the game or learning the physical/technical aspects of streaming, but will rather deal with the prospect of creating media for your group and managing your group's media platform like YouTube or Twitch. Like I indicated earlier, the target audience for these videos are current and future members of IUB Smash. However, if you're a viewer who's not a member of this group and just so happened upon this video, don't feel put out. Most of my content is applicable to any and everyone interested in making media for their Smash group. With that said, let's get started. So in order to get started sort of making the production materials for your Smash group, you're going to want to have access to three things. And those three things are a sort of image or photo manipulator software such as Photoshop, some sort of video editing program, and you're also going to want to have access to some sort of streaming software. Now, amongst all that stuff, the main things that I use are Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Premiere Pro. And Adobe Photoshop is a professional image sort of manipulation program. Same deal with Adobe Premiere Pro, except for in the area of video editing. So basically, for the most part, you're probably going to want to get Adobe products, most notably Photoshop or Premiere Pro. Now, in order to find Photoshop, before you end up trying to buy or find Photoshop, you're going to probably want to come over here to the Adobe Help area, which shows like the system requirements for using that kind of software. So over here we've got, well, that's After Effects. Over here we've got Adobe CC, which is the most recent version of Adobe Photoshop. And I'm just going to look at the Windows stuff. It's available for Windows and Mac OS. It suggests that you have at least a 2 gigahertz processor. And for those of you who don't really know what that means, it's basically like gigahertz is like the ability of your computer to process information. So basically, the bigger the number, probably the better processor you have. Even though I'm pretty sure the real computer people are probably going to be screaming at me because I'm making it too simple. Also, it asks you to have 2 gigabytes of RAM, and RAM is essentially like the memory that your computer has that it can store for short term. So if you're making like a video and it's got like a crap ton of stuff on it, if you only have 2 gigabytes of RAM, that's probably going to not really work out. So ideally, you're going to want to have a computer probably with the 8 gigahertz recommended, but my computer has 5.2 and I get by just fine. So, but you're probably not going to want to have a computer with 2 gigabytes of RAM, because seriously, if you have a computer with only 2 gigabytes of RAM, that thing's probably a tablet. I don't really understand Macs as much, but it seems to be the same sort of information. More than 2 gigs of RAM, and Macs they usually have a pretty good processor, so that's usually not pretty much an issue. So if you don't really know what your specs for your computer are, you just kind of bought a computer or maybe it's been a while. If you happen to have a recent copy or a recent version of Windows 8.1 operating system, you can go over here to the Start button. And you can go over to this area called PC Info, which is way over here. If it doesn't, or PC Settings, my bad. And I imagine if it doesn't show up over here, you can probably come over here to the search engine and type it in as well. But you can click on the PC Settings, and it will load up. And you'll come over to PC and Devices. And on PC device, you come all the way down here, and it'll show PC Info, and it'll pretty much give you all your information, like on like how much RAM you have, what kind of processor you're using, the power of your processor. So mine's is 2.1, so I pretty much meet the requirements in terms of processing power for Adobe Photoshop. And it also tells you whether or not you're using a 64-bit operating system or a 32-bit one, because there's going to be different versions for like Adobe. So you might want to buy. So if you're like, for my case, I have a 64-bit operating system, so I'm going to want to get the 64-bit version of Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Premiere Pro. So like I said earlier, the main audience for these videos was future or current members of Indiana University Bloomington Smash Group. And luckily, if you're a current member of Indiana University, you can come over here to this area called IUware. and it's pretty much a area to get free resources, usually in the form of software. And lucky for you, you can come over here, click on Design and Production, and you have access to Adobe Creative Cloud 2015. And I'm not just talking about Photoshop, I'm not just talking about Adobe Premiere, I'm talking about every freaking thing in Adobe Creative Cloud 2015. So you get After Effects, Dreamweaver Edition, basically a bunch of stuff that you might not even freaking use, but you should just go in and download it. Even if you're not like a creator, you should probably just come in and download this because it's such a good freaking deal. So do that right now, even if you don't care about being a Smash streamer or whatever. So essentially, if you're an Indiana University student, you basically have the hookup. But let's say you're one of those viewers who isn't a member of Indiana University or a student of Indiana University. You can also get Adobe Photoshop from the Adobe Store or the Adobe website. Granted, it is like more like a subscription service, not like a one-time paying thing, even though I'm pretty sure there's a way. They probably offer one-time versions that you can buy, probably like Adobe Photoshop Elements or something. But yeah, the Adobe Photoshop regular CC is available for like $10 a month. And if that's too much, let's see. Let's go on to Amazon and see what happens. You might be able to get this more consumer-friendly version called Adobe Photoshop Elements, which, you know, for the most part does everything that Photoshop does. It's just more consumer-friendly and it actually costs less. So yeah. Adobe Photoshop Elements, you can get that, and you can just kind of like buy that, and you don't have to go through the whole subscription thing. And it's pretty freaking similar to Adobe Photoshop, except maybe it lacks some more professional elements that you might see in the Creative Cloud version. Also, if you just, you know, maybe you just don't want to pay for anything, there's also the open source alternatives. And open source is basically a program who's like whoever made it, they've made the copyright so that people can kind of alter it, and usually like alter the source code and like change it to their needs. And usually open source stuff is usually free. So one example of like an open source alternative to Photoshop was this thing called GIMP 2.8. And after downloading it and like messing with it a little bit, it seems to like right now only have two. There's like a third little box that comes off to the side, so I don't know why it's not over here. But if you kind of look at it, it's kind of does the same stuff that Photoshop does. It's kind of like the imitation serial version of Photoshop. Like, it doesn't look quite as nice, and maybe it doesn't have some features that Photoshop has, but it kind of, from like the first time, like a couple minutes that I had been messing with it, it seems to do the same thing for the most part. So I'm pretty sure that you could probably get by with this free open source alternative called GIMP. And I'm also going to have links to this website in the description, along with things like to lynda.com and to the IUware and the text specifications and stuff, so you don't really have to worry about that. So the next thing that you're going to want to check out or download is this thing called Open Broadcaster software. And what it essentially is, it's this thing that the streamers that you see on Twitch and whatnot use to broadcast their gaming onto Twitch. So basically, people usually open up this software and on their computer, and they run all the wires from like their Xbox or whatever into their computer, and then this software sends the signal out to stream, and then to Twitch, and people are able to view it on Twitch. Now, much like GIMP, this sort of Photoshop-y software, Open Broadcaster software is also open source, which means that you can download it for free, and it's actually quite good because we use it at Indiana University, and once we got the hang of it, it was actually a really effective program to use. Also, you don't necessarily have to use Open Broadcaster software. There's other kinds of stream software that you can use, such as XSplit. We just get the best stuff with Open Broadcast software, and we're just the most used to it, so that's what we use. Also, if you're interested in using OBS or learning about it, it's kind of complicated, especially if you're not used to or understand things like aspect ratios and all that sort of stuff, or like FPS, like with the difference between like 30 FPS and like 60 FPS. You can come over here, and Twitch has this wonderful area in their support center called and it's basically a space specifically for Open Broadcaster software. So it has like a getting started, and it teaches you about each little part in the settings, such as like the broadcast settings, and it kind of suggests to you what you ought to do to get everything started. And it probably will do a much better job of explaining how to use this thing than I ever could. So you're going to want to check this out. And like I said, this will also be available in the, or the link to this will be available in the description. Now, the reason why you're going to want to download Open Broadcaster software, especially if you're someone like me who doesn't actually do the streaming, but just kind of makes this stuff for the stream, is that by having Open Broadcaster software, you might have a situation where you have to make a lower third for someone's name. Like when people do like a scene change and it shows the two commentators, there's going to be like professional streamers usually have like a lower third where it showcases the two commentators' names. And in order to make sure that your material, your lower third or whatever, actually fits the settings, you're going to want to be able to go into, Open Broadcaster and sort of drag your material into that program to make sure that everything kind of fits right. And because if you don't have access to it, you won't be able to test and check it out. So you're like, at the very least, even if you're not a streamer, if you're making stuff for a stream, it's going to be a good idea to have the same software that your streamer is using so that you can make sure that you're making the right materials for that given situation. So to reiterate, the three things that you're going to need in order to get started is going to be a photo manipulation software such as Photoshop, a video editor such as Premiere Pro, and access to a streaming software such as OBS or XSplit. Furthermore, if you're an Indiana University student, you can get access to these free Adobe products through Indiana University, the IUware. And if you're not an Indiana University student, you can either buy the consumer-friendly versions on Amazon or something, or you can look to open source alternatives. And OBS is pretty much free for everybody, so you just go onto their website and you download it. But once you've gotten these three things, you should be well on your way to making awesome content for your Smash Brothers group.